The air in the small study was thick with tension. On the desk lay an open Bible, its pages fluttering slightly in the breeze from the window. "It is written right here, Elias," whispered Sarah, her voice trembling with a mix of concern and conviction. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image. Why do you kneel before that piece of wood?" Elias, a young man who had recently found his home in the ancient faith of the Catholic Church, looked at the small, hand-painted icon of Christ on his wall. He felt the weight of her question. To Sarah, his gesture looked like a betrayal of the first commandment. To Elias, it was a window into heaven. But how could he explain the difference between worshiping an object and honoring the one the object represented? This is the question that has echoed through the hallways of history for 2,000 years. Are Catholics committing idolatry? Or is there a biblical and historical depth to this practice that many have simply forgotten? Today, we are going to look past the surface of the wood and stone to find the truth about sacred images. Elias is an architecture student, someone who appreciates how physical structures point to invisible realities. He grew up in a household where religious art was seen as a dangerous distraction. Sarah, his cousin, remains a firm believer in that perspective. For her, the bare walls of her prayer room signify purity. For Elias, the images in his room are like family photographs that keep him connected to the heroes of his faith. This conflict reached a breaking point during a family dinner, leading to this quiet confrontation in the study. Elias realized that he didn't just need a feeling. He needed the facts. He needed to know why the Church, for 20 centuries, has encouraged the faithful to kneel, to kiss icons, and to surround themselves with the faces of the saints. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments what you were taught about this topic in your church or parish. To understand Elias's struggle, we have to travel back to the 8th century after Christ. This was the era of the Iconoclast controversy, a period of soft suspense and hard violence. The Emperor of Byzantium, influenced by external political pressures and a literalist reading of the Old Testament, ordered the destruction of all religious images. He believed that by cleansing the churches of icons, he would win God's favor. For decades, monks were persecuted, and ancient masterpieces were whitewashed. However, the church did not remain silent. In the year 787 after Christ, the Second Council of Nicaea was convened. The bishops and the successors of the apostles met to define a truth that had been lived since the 1st century after Christ. They made a vital distinction that Sarah had never heard. They distinguished between latria, the worship reserved for God alone, and dulia, the honor or veneration given to the saints and their representations. The fathers of the church argued that when a Christian bows before an icon of Christ, the honor passes to the prototype. In other words, the wood is not being worshipped, the person depicted is being honored. They pointed out that Christians had been painting Christ and the martyrs in the catacombs of Rome since the 2nd century after Christ. The church didn't invent images in the Middle Ages. She protected them as a testament to the reality of the Incarnation. Sarah's primary objection came from Exodus chapter 20. It seems like an open and shut case, but Elias began to show her the rest of the Bible. He pointed to Exodus chapter 25, where God, the very same God who gave the commandments, orders the Israelites to weave images of cherubim into the curtains of the tabernacle, and to forge 2 golden cherubim to sit atop the Ark of the Covenant. In the 9th century before Christ, Solomon's temple was filled with carvings of palm trees, flowers, and even more massive statues of angels. Did God contradict himself? No. The prohibition was against idols, objects meant to replace the true God. But God actually commanded the use of religious art to decorate his dwelling place. Elias then pointed to Numbers chapter 21. When the people were dying of snake bites, God told Moses to make a bronze serpent and lift it up on a pole. Anyone who looked at the bronze image was healed. It was a physical object, made by human hands, used by God as a channel of grace. The Catholic Church understands that we are not spirits floating in a void. We are creatures of flesh and blood. God uses the material world, water, bread, wine, and art to speak to our hearts. The absolute ban on images was transformed the moment Jesus Christ was born. As St. Paul says in Colossians chapter 1, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Because God became visible in the flesh, he can now be depicted in art. Elias shared the words of St. John Damascene, a brilliant defender of icons from the 8th century after Christ. John wrote, "I do not worship matter. I worship the creator of matter, who became matter for my sake." This was a revolutionary insight for Sarah. John explained that in the Old Testament, God had no body, so any image was a lie. But in the New Testament, God took a human face. To refuse to depict Christ is, in a sense, to deny that he truly became man. Then there is the witness of the catacombs. In the 3rd century after Christ, during the height of Roman persecution, Christians were already painting scenes of the Good Shepherd and the Virgin Mary on the walls where they buried their dead. They didn't see these as idols. They saw them as sermons in color. For the illiterate, the images were the Bible of the poor. They helped the faithful remember the stories of salvation when they didn't have a book to read. If this is helping you understand your faith more clearly, leave a like and share it with someone who has the same question, so this message reaches more people. But why kneel? Sarah asked. Doesn't kneeling imply worship? Elias explained that in the Bible, kneeling or bowing is a cultural sign of deep respect, not always an act of divine worship. In the first book of Kings, people bowed before the king of Israel. In the book of Joshua, chapter 7, Joshua fell face down before the Ark of the Covenant and stayed there until evening. He wasn't worshiping a gold-plated box. He was prostrating himself in the presence of God. The mystery of the image deepens when we consider the psychology of the human heart. Elias explained to Sarah that our minds are designed to think in pictures. When we pray to God, we naturally form an image of him in our minds. If we don't have a sacred image to guide us, we often create a God in our own image, a God who shares our prejudices or our limited perspectives. A crucifix, or an icon of a saint, acts as a guardrail for the imagination. It keeps our prayer anchored in the historical reality of Jesus Christ. It reminds us that our faith is not a set of abstract philosophical principles, but a story involving real people, real blood, and real wood. This is why, in the 7th century after Christ, the church had to fight so hard to keep the visual gospel alive. If you remove the images, you eventually lose the grip on the fact that God became a man who could be seen. Furthermore, we must address the golden calf argument that many use to attack Catholics. In Exodus chapter 32, the Israelites made a golden calf and said, "This is your God." This is the definition of idolatry, giving the worship due to God to a created thing. But notice the difference. When the Israelites looked at the bronze serpent in the desert, they didn't say, "This serpent is our God." They looked at it as a sign of God's power. The Catholic Church has always condemned the worship of statues. In the 16th century after Christ, the Council of Trent reiterated that the honor which is given to them if a man kisses a photo of his wife while he is away at war. No one accuses him of being in love with paper. Everyone understands that the paper is a medium for his love for a person. Why do we grant that common sense to every area of life except for our relationship with God? The myth is that Catholics believe the statue has power, or that a God lives inside the plaster. The reality is that no Catholic thinks the statue of St. Anthony is actually St. Anthony. It is a representation. Just as Sarah might kiss a photograph of her late mother out of love, a Catholic might kiss a crucifix. The kiss isn't for the paper or the wood. It is for the person. The objection that God is spirit and must be worshipped in spirit is true, but it doesn't mean we leave our bodies behind. When we kneel, our physical posture helps our soul to realize its humility before God. We are a unity of body and soul, and the Catholic Church is the only home that fully honors both. Understanding this changed Elias's prayer life. It wasn't about the objects anymore. It was about the focus. He told Sarah about a friend of his, a man named Julian. Julian had struggled with deep anxiety for years. He found it hard to quiet his mind during prayer. One day, Julian was given a small crucifix. Instead of closing his eyes and fighting his racing thoughts, he simply sat and looked at the image of the suffering Christ. He saw the wounds, the crown of thorns, and the expression of love. In that physical focus, Julian's heart finally found the stillness it had been seeking. The image didn't replace Jesus. It led Julian directly to him. Think about the impact of the silent sermon of an image. In the Middle Ages, specifically the 12th century after Christ and 13th century after Christ, the great cathedrals of Europe were built as Bibles in stone. A peasant who could not read a single word of Latin could walk into a cathedral like Chartres and understand the entire history of salvation by looking at the stained glass and the statues. These images were not distractions. They were the primary way the gospel was preached to the masses. By removing images, the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century after Christ inadvertently made faith more academic and less accessible to the simple and the poor. The Catholic Church has always defended the right of the simple to have a visual relationship with their Savior. This is why we have statues in our parishes and icons in our homes. In 2026, we are bombarded by thousands of secular images every day. Billboards, social media, advertisements, all designed to pull our hearts toward the world. Having a sacred image in our homes is an act of spiritual rebellion. It is a way of saying, this space belongs to God. Whether it is a mother teaching her child to blow a kiss to a statue of the baby Jesus, or an old man kneeling before the Stations of the Cross, these are human ways of expressing a supernatural love. They connect us to the historical continuity of the family of God. We aren't praying alone. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. The saints are not dead. They are more alive than we are, and their images remind us that we are part of a family that spans heaven and earth. In the end, Elias and Sarah sat in silence for a few minutes. The piece of wood didn't look so threatening to her anymore. It looked like a bridge. Elias realized that the conflict between them wasn't really about statues. It was about how we understand the Incarnation. If God is too holy to be represented in art, then perhaps he was too holy to become a man who walked in the dust of Palestine. But the gospel tells us that God is not afraid of matter. He created it, he blessed it, and he inhabited it. The use of images is not a departure from the Bible, but a fulfillment of the mystery of the Incarnation. God came to us in a way we could see, touch, and follow. By honoring his image and the images of his friends, the saints, we are celebrating the victory of God in our very human world. Does having a visual focus help your prayer life? Or do you find it distracting? Can a piece of art really be a window to the divine? We must ask ourselves if we have limited God by insisting he only speaks through words and books. If God chose to speak through a burning bush and a bronze serpent, why would he not speak through the beauty of a well-crafted icon? In the description, you will find another video where I go even deeper into a related topic. Watch it next so you can keep growing in your Catholic formation and not stop with just this explanation. Thank you for watching, and may the beauty of the Lord lead you to his heart.